Hello, all you cool cats and kittens, and Britney Spears fans. We are back with our favorite class reductionist, Caleb Maupin, who has just released a uh, controversial new book called BreadTube Serves Imperialism. We are thrilled to have you back to talk about this. I've watched as many clips as I can find of other people reviewing this book, and they seem to be really focused on the names you're dropping rather than the content of your argument. Which surprise, that's I feel like what anarchists do sometimes, especially if they have lots of followers on the internet. Uh, you know, the good anarchists I know spend time organizing in the streets. Okay, these people, and you do go into that in your book, how some of these people, like, they just sit behind their computer and make videos. They're not really involved or engaged with anything. Um, and so I just want a disclaimer for my anarchist friends. I know do some heavy lifting in the streets out here, but it is very typical of these internet anarchists to pull shit like this. So, Caleb, what is BreadTube? Where did that name come from, and what inspired you to write this book?
Well, the book is a critique of a certain milieu of internet commentators who claim authority on Marxism and socialism, and are the primary voices representing or claiming to represent that ideology online in the United States. If you look for videos on Marxism, socialism, communism, you're going to get a bread tuber who comes up, and what they say is not Marxism, and it's pretty inconsistent with Marxism, with anarchism, etc. And so, this book basically is a critique of their ideology. But the reason that I decided to do the book was because a little bit of information was passed on to me about somebody who might be advising them. And we can get into that a little bit later in the conversation. But based on that information, I thought a book needed to be written. The name BreadTube, interestingly, it comes from Peter Kropotkin. Peter Kropotkin, one of his most important books is called The Conquest of Bread. And so that's the basis for BreadTube. And actually, in chapter 2, I talk a lot about Peter Kropotkin, and Peter Kropotkin was a pretty good guy. I mean, I wouldn't agree with everything he did. There were certainly some moments where he let the revolutionary movement down. He was a bit of an ultra leftist. He supported World War I at one point, which was kind of seen as selling out by a lot of folks. But there was a subway station named after him in the Soviet Union. He also, it's worth noting, his funeral was approved personally by Lenin. And in the Soviet Union, there was a funeral procession of thousands of people that mourned him. He was considered maybe not a member of the Bolsheviks, but he was definitely a fellow traveler of the revolutionary movement. And his book is pretty good. I don't necessarily agree with his perspective, but it's not that far from Bolshevism. He focused on organizing peasants and the rural population. The Bolsheviks focused on organizing factory workers. But BreadTube is a completely different entity. And the fact they draw from him is a little bit of a tragedy, because it kind of tarnishes his legacy. Because Peter Kropotkin was a very admirable figure. His autobiography about being a revolutionary is a very, very exciting read. I mean, it's a page turner. This guy was a very, very active person who was in and out of prisons and running from country to country his whole life. And he was also an inspiration for Mao. Before Mao became a communist, he was a Kropotkinist anarchist. Mao was a follower of Peter Kropotkin. He had the New People's Studies Society, and it was a Kropotkinist group in China.
I actually did not know that Mao was an anarchist or even a follower of Kropotkin. I think it's interesting that too that a lot of people I know who claim to be an anarchist have not even read this book. And it's quite an important foundation for anarchist theory, which well, surprises me.
Yeah, and that points to the main thing, which is at the time Kropotkin was alive, the difference between a communist and an anarchist, or a Marxist and an anarchist, was mainly about who you organized. The anarchists were concerned with organizing the peasantry, and the communists were concerned with organizing the factory workers. But as we saw in China, it was the peasantry that laid the basis for the communist revolution. Mao said, "While these may not be proletarian, factory workers, we are bringing them proletarian ideology with which to get their freedom." And that was the basis of Trotsky's discounting of the Chinese Revolution, was because it was mainly peasants. And he said the peasantry is a class without a future that is not revolutionary. So that's particularly interesting. But the conquest of bread, or the bread book, has absolutely nothing to do with the worldview of BreadTube. I mean, I don't see the connection. I mean, the conquest of bread is about kind of organizing a more voluntary socialist society to raise living standards, to eradicate poverty, and to make sure everyone has what they need. It's basically an anarchist. It's very similar to Marxism, an anarchist version of that. What BreadTube believes, generally, I go after three particular positions that they hold. The first position is that they don't seem to understand the difference between capitalism and socialism. They think that this is defined purely by the inequality between employers and employees, right? That capitalism is factory owners and factory workers, and that socialism is when you have worker cooperatives. And they fail to understand that that capitalism is a system of production organized for profit, and that simply organizing capitalism with workers as owners, right, and production for profit, where the workers get a share of the profits, does not eliminate that problem, right? That the problem of capitalism is that it's production for profit, and that you need a rationally planned, centrally planned economy, eliminating the rule of profit, to get beyond the horrors of capitalism. And that's the point of chapter 2 of the book. The other thing is that modern capitalism is not, it's become kind of a meme on my live, but modern capitalism is not a pencil factory, right? Modern capitalism is not an individual factory owner exploiting an individual group of factory workers. Modern capitalism is giant cartels and big monopolies and banks that dominate the world. Modern capitalism is huge corporations that stretch their tentacles all over the globe. And Lenin wrote a whole book about this called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And that if you're simply going around talking about factory owners and factory workers, you're kind of missing the point. And also that one of the aspects of capitalism that, Karl Marx talks a lot about is that, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and the actual involvement of workers in the point of production is constantly decreasing in capitalism, right? And, we have a big service sector now. We have all kinds of jobs. There's all kinds of working class people who don't sell their labor on a factory floor and are not involved in creating surplus value at the point of production. So those factory floor analogies, they're correct largely when Karl Marx wrote about them, and they're correct to this day, but technology is making that less and less a factor in the economy. But we still have an owning class, and we still have a working class, and that owning class still owns huge factories and banks and oil wells, and they operate them to make profits, not for social use, not for what's good for society, but in order to make profits. And it's that is the problem. Capitalism is irrational, right? It's production for profit, not for social use. Socialism is when you have a rationally organized economy that doesn't have the recurring problems that capitalism has, like overproduction, like technology eliminating jobs, like living standards dropping as technology increases, like poverty amid plenty, right? And that profits in command is the basis of the difference, and that capitalism is the rule in our time of huge multinationals and corporations. Capitalism in our time is imperialism, and that socialism is when the means of production function for the good of society. This is basic Marxism, but BreadTube has distorted that. Now, their model, which is that, as Bosch has said many, many times, that socialism is just everything being exactly as it is now, except every company is a worker cooperative. That doesn't solve the problems of capitalism. Imagine that Raytheon or Boeing or General Electric were a worker cooperative, right? Then all the workers would be lobbying Congress to go to war all the time because they would want their profits to increase. They would be getting a share of the profits, right? Imagine that the private prisons, the guards were all, shareholders in it. Well, they would be lobbying and actively trying to imprison as many people as possible to increase their share of the profits, right? Imagine that big pharma companies were cooperatively owned. Then all the employees would want as many people to get addicted to opioid medications as possible to increase their profits. The problems of production organized for profit, not for social use, don't go away simply by making the workers part owners. And furthermore, the capitalists have thought of this already. Many places you will see profit sharing schemes implemented simply because they want to make capitalism more efficient. It used to be that employers in factories would pay piece wages. They wouldn't pay per hour. They would just pay you, if you worked in a tire factory, they'd pay you for how many tires got produced. And it was because of communist organizing and the labor movement that in 1938, they passed something called the Fair Labor Standards Act that said you can't do that. You have to pay a minimum hourly wage, right? And the idea that workers just get a share of the profits, right? That doesn't necessarily make conditions better for workers. Now, the BreadTube crowd would say they want total workers' democracy. Every worker has an equal share. Okay, well, first of all, we don't see that in a lot of worker cooperative places. Mondragon, for example, they often, just export, and hire out labor from Latin America and places like that. But even if you did, you still wouldn't get rid of the problem of production for profit.
Right. And Vosh has recently proved you right in this book recently with that clip that there's this clip going around where he is basically saying that if the United States pulls out of these countries that they've devastated economically and underdeveloped, then China would come in and they'll
their boots on the ground. I was like, girl.
But it just underscores how little people like Vosh in the BreadTube universe don't understand how imperialism works. They think imperialism is an action. It's like going in and trading with other countries or just like doing anything with any other country. But China is an anti-imperialist socialist country, and China goes around the world cooperating with other countries, not going in and imposing their markets on other countries. That's what the United States and its Western partners do. He's kind of just proven your whole point of the book.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, Iran and China have for a long time had a plan of bringing stability to Afghanistan. And that plan is called trade and transport. And they want to bring railway through Afghanistan, give access to the ocean so that production could take place in Afghanistan. There could be job opportunities other than terrorist groups and narco gangs. China moving into Afghanistan, if you look at their track record, would be a pretty good thing for Afghanistan, right? China tends to stabilize and develop the countries it trades with, whereas the imperialists tend to tear down and demolish the countries that they trade with in order to keep them as captive markets. That's what the export of capital that Lenin talks about is. It's when you go to a country and you destroy their corporations and you export your corporations there. They have to buy all their stuff from you. NAFTA is a great example of imperialism. Mexico used to have its own farmers, but then with NAFTA, the U.S. agribusiness went in there, put all the domestic farmers out of business, and now they import their food from the United States. Same happened in Haiti. Imperialism is the British Empire going to India and burning down all the textile mills. Imperialism is the fact that Nigeria is the top oil producing country on the African continent, but yet the people there are poor. Why? Because the oil that comes from Nigeria goes into the pockets of Shell and ExxonMobil and BP and Chevron, the export of Western corporations to Nigeria, not the people of Nigeria. And the country that had the highest life expectancy on the African continent prior to 2011 was Libya, where the people had risen up and seized control of their oil resources, and with a socialist economy, used those oil resources to raise the people up out of poverty. And now, what did the imperialists do when they went to Libya? Did they make Libya better off? No, they demolished the place, and now it's a disaster, right? And if you look at what's going on around the world, right, all these wars, they're basically something else that BreadTube promotes, which is degrowth. Right? BreadTube is going around saying, oh, there's too many people rising up out of poverty. People have too much stuff. Living standards are going up too high. And so, Iraq used to be a country that had its own economy and it raised people out of poverty. And now it's demolished. It's been degrown, right? Afghanistan, the Taliban had gotten rid of the narco gangs and had some infrastructure projects or something. Well, now they've been removed and there's been chaos, right? If you look at Syria, right? That was a Ba'ath socialist country that was working with Iran and China to develop. Well, now it's been wrecked by civil war. And the United States goes around the third world degrowing countries. It's degrowth, driving down living standards, right? Whereas China trades with these countries and, Chinese corporations go there, they do business, they build up the state sector, they build infrastructure, the things you need to have an economy expand, like highways, like railroads, like hospitals, like schools. A great example of that is, Ecuador. Ecuador. I went to Ecuador in 1999 when I was 12 years old. I went back to Ecuador in 2013, and that was after a socialist government had come in under Correa, and after a lot of Chinese investment had come in there. And it didn't demolish the economy of Ecuador. The economy of Ecuador vastly expanded. I mean, it was like a whole different country, the amount of development I had seen. Right. So I guess, when Vosh says that, well, China will come in, he doesn't seem to understand that that would probably be a good thing. Right. And that the whole reason the United States attacks these countries is to keep them in a state of poverty and underdevelopment, to maintain the monopoly of the West. Imperialism is about economics. And that's what these people don't understand. Imperialism is not an action. Imperialism is not a policy, and imperialism is not cultural per se, right? And in fact, often the imperialists will promote, very, very backward, primitive things in the countries that they're colonizing in order to keep the underdevelopment. The British didn't try to, quote unquote, civilize the people of India and get rid of their caste system. They did the opposite. They reinforced the caste system, and they played Muslims against Hindus, and they did everything they could to reinforce this primitive, barbaric caste system that was holding back development and keeping people in India backward, that communists and revolutionaries in India have been struggling against. Right. The United States isn't going to the Middle East and forcing them to adopt, more modern views. The United States is backing the Saudis, who spread Wahhabism, the ideology of Osama bin Laden, all through the Middle East. And in Latin America, right? It's the Sandinistas that are wiping out poverty and wiping out illiteracy. It's the United States that is, arming the drug cartels and at the same time arming some of these very, very primitive indigenous groups that don't believe in electricity and things like that. So the idea that imperialism, get the movie Avatar out of your mind. It's not the movie Avatar, okay? That's a great movie, dances with Smurfs or whatever, but that's not, it's not imperialism, right? Economic relationship that Lenin describes in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Imperialism is keeping the world poor so that Western monopolies and big banks can stay rich. That's what imperialism is. It's not Avatar. It's not Dances with Smurfs, Dances with Wolves, whatever. It's not that, okay? And people are missing the point.
But state capitalism, Caleb. How can you be socialist if you're a state capitalist?
Well, state capitalism exists. And like Singapore, I would say, is a state capitalist country. Saudi Arabia is state capitalism. After World War II in Britain, they nationalized almost all of the industries and rebuilt them with taxpayer money, but then sold them off again in the 80s with Margaret Thatcher. It was still a for-profit economy. That's capitalism. Capitalism is production for capital. Socialism is production for society, right? And it was in Britain, you had a capital-driven economy, a profit-driven economy. But you had a lot of government involvement. And Saudi Arabia is a profit-driven economy with lots of government involvement. Singapore is that. But in China, it's not that, right? You have a government that forces the economy to work in the interest of society overall, that controls the means of production, be they private, public, cooperative, whatever, forces them to work in the interest of society overall. So even though you have a private sector, it's still socialism because production is being carried out for society. That's the difference between capitalism and socialism. And that's what folks need to be clear on. And just, having an employee stock ownership program doesn't change that. And that's what these folks don't seem to understand.
I think one of my favorite Bosch moments is when he perfectly describes Chinese market socialism and endorses it. He's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. But then he's got all those other videos where he just shits on China all the time, just repeats State Department lies.
What he's talking about, right? And to some people think there's a whole chapter on him. There is not. There is a chapter at the beginning called Who and What is BreadTube that talks about various personalities. He gets a couple paragraphs, but Vosh doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, one day Vosh says one thing, the other day he says something else. He's got people advising him, okay? There are people who whisper in Vosh's ear. Vosh doesn't know Lenin from a pipe organ, okay? I mean, real, okay? He has no clue what he's talking about, right? And there are people who advise him who are academic, most likely, and have learned Marxism in a purely academic setting. I suspect one of those people is Ben Burgess, but there are other people who kind of feed Vosh talking points, and you can see there's a very embarrassing stream where Vosh has a list of quotations that prove you're supposed to vote for Joe Biden.
Oh my God, I remember.
And he reads them off. and he has no idea what he's talking about.
Mm.
None whatsoever. I mean, and it's embarrassing, and he has no understanding of Chinese history or Russian history. He's just reading this stuff off, and he didn't make that list. Somebody else assembled that list for him, and it's painful to watch, right? And again, you know, Vosh doing his thing. I mean, look, we all learn, right? I mean, we all, life is nothing but learning, right? When I was in college, they would call the older folks, they'd call them lifelong learners. And other people said, well, that's not a good thing because we should all learn throughout our life. Okay, there's nothing wrong with being ignorant about it. What's wrong with it is that Vosh has been appointed by social media as the primary voice on Marxism, number one. And number two, Vosh then goes around telling people that if you are legitimately anti-imperialist, if you legitimately believe in Marxism, that you are the same as white supremacists and neo-Nazis and deserve to be murdered. Well, I'm sorry, that's a little bit problematic in my view, right? I don't think that people who defend the USSR or defend China or defend Cuba, I don't think they're the equivalent of white supremacists who murder people on the street or deny the Holocaust, right? And the fact that he makes that equivocation constantly, that is a constant theme. If you are a quote unquote tanky, you are the same as a Nazi, right? I mean, that's vile, poisonous stuff, especially when the feeling on the left is that tankies, or that people that are Nazis deserve to be killed, right? That is the feeling. And he's cultivating a whole group of people that are interested in socialism and Marxism, not only to support the continued occupation of Afghanistan, but also to believe that genuine anti-imperialists and anti-imperialist states are somehow the equivalent of Nazis. And that is very, very, very dangerous.
Yeah, and I just think it's really ironic that he ignores how the party that he claims everyone should be voting for installed literal Ukrainian Nazis. They back and supported Ukrainian Nazis. So
yeah, and he cheers the Hong Kong protesters who wave frog and Trump signs. But it isn't just him. I talk about January 6th in this book, and I talk about the fact that on January 6th, that was a pro-imperialist crowd, right? I mean, that was the Falun Gong, the anti-Chinese fanatics of the Epoch Times. That was Miami Cubans and anti-Venezuelan, exile kind of people. That was, the Unification Church and the Moonies were there. Shah supporters from Los Angeles who want to overthrow the Iranian government. That was a pro-imperialist crowd. But Joe Biden, in his State of the Union, linked that crowd with China, right? Throughout the speech, he referred to anti-imperialist states as autocracies and autocrats. And then he ended his speech by saying, we in America, after January 6th, we overcame insurrection and autocracy. And that is the talking point, to equate the far right and Trump with anti-imperialist countries, right? And this comes from the top. I mean, this narrative that somehow, if you're an anti-imperialist, you're the same as the American far right or the same as white supremacists. This comes from the top. And it's a very dangerous narrative. And you'll notice that, there were Israeli flags all over that pro-Trump crowd.
Yeah.
The Likud supporters, people that were big supporters of the Likud party and Netanyahu came out in big numbers. You never saw that on CNN. But there were some confused, white working class people that brought Confederate flags, and they're deeply wrong to do that. That's a deeply offensive symbol. It should be taken down. I never want to see another Confederate flag in my life. It's an awful symbol. But the fact that it focused on them, it's like, working class people are the enemy. Average middle Americans are the enemy. They're all racist. They're all sexist. They're Euro settlers. They're privileged, and they need to be taken down a peg or two. That's strategic, right? That BreadTube and Biden are aiming for middle America. They think middle America is the enemy. They want to drive down living standards. They call for degrowth, and this is very dangerous stuff. And so, of course, middle America, average working people who see an attack on them coming and are being told that they're bad and that they deserve to be poor, of course they're turning to the right, because the left is giving them the middle finger and the right is pretending to care about them. Well, we know Trump is a demagogue and that his movement, Betsy DeVos is not, she doesn't care about the working class. Neither does Bernie Marcus, the owner of Home Depot. Neither do the fracking companies, right? Neither does the PayPal guy. What's his name? I don't remember what his name is, right? He was a big Trump supporter. They don't care about America's working families. But when the left is hostile to the working class and says that working people fighting for their rights is class reductionism and fascist somehow, you can see why the right-wing demagogy works. These two groupings, the right wing and the synthetic left, they feed off of each other, right? So there you go.
Yeah, no, this actually leads into my next question, because the last thing that the ruling class wants is the working class uniting together against our low-wage police state and replacing it with a government of action that fights for working families, which you say all the time, which is what you call for, which all socialists should be calling for. How does BreadTube act as a counter gang for the imperialists in helping to stop this from happening?
Well, I end the book by quoting from Marx's pamphlet, The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, where he describes the Society of December 10th, this counter gang built by, Louis Bonaparte or Napoleon III to kind of carry out his coup in 1851 in France. And it's a collection of various individuals who basically live at the expense of the laboring nation. He says it. He talks about literati and intellectuals that are interested in books. He talks about brothel keepers and pimps. He talks about people who hustle other people out of their money. He talks about this collection of kind of nefarious elements that I guess in France at the time were called La Bohème or Bohemians. He's talking about hippies, really. This collection of people, this Society of December 10th that Louis Bonaparte formed in order to push the agenda of one section, of the ruling class onto French society and stabilize French society. That kind of counter gang that was formed to stabilize French capitalism in 1851. I quote from Marx talking about that. And basically, if you look at it, BreadTube is a modern day incarnation of that phenomenon. There is a fight in the ruling class right now. The lower level capitalists are fighting with the more entrenched and powerful capitalists. BreadTube represents one faction. And probably the closest thing to a smoking gun that we can find on that is the information that I was provided. So in the book, I talk about an individual named Steve Hassan. And Steve Hassan is basically, he's the top deprogrammer. And he calls himself a deprogrammer. And he's an individual who, I guess, his life story is that he joined the Moonies, the Unification Church, when he was 19, and he left that organization, and now he goes around talking about how cults are bad and getting people out of cults. And well, he got on television right after January 6th and said that there needed to be a mass deprogramming in the United States, basically. A deprogramming of the country from Donald Trump. And he wrote a book called The Cult of Trump, arguing that Trump is the leader of a cult. There needs to be a mass deprogramming. And the other thing is that, Steve Hassan's history as a deprogrammer is quite interesting. He admits that he was involved in what he calls involuntary deprogrammings, i.e. kidnappings. There's some other nefarious things. I mean, his mentor was Robert J. Lifton, who was a U.S. Air Force psychiatrist who was involved in a huge amount of research on American GIs who were captured in Korea and were converted to communism, wrote a whole book about, why people become communists, and the whole theory of brainwashing comes from Robert J. Lifton. In addition to that, Steve Hassan, has several times hinted that he has some inside information about his former associates in the Unification Church and their relationship with the CIA. And the more you look at Steve Hassan, he's not just a guy, okay? He's not just a psychologist. He's somebody who's very, very well connected. And, he has streamed with Faraday Speaks, Caleb Kane on the channel. They have done streams together. They have a relationship, and it was passed on to me by some folks who I will not name, some unnamed sources who monitor Steve Hassan's work. He's made a lot of enemies over the years with his involuntary deprogrammings, and there's some signed affidavits by some people like Arthur Russell that say he's done some particularly nefarious stuff. Steve Hassan has a lot of enemies, and he's monitored by various people. And I was informed that he was advising ContraPoints and some other people in the BreadTube universe, and that their aim was to deprogram people that have been won over, become part of the alt-right. And that makes sense if you watch ContraPoints videos, if you watch some of the material they put out there, that BreadTube, a lot of what they're doing is an effort to deprogram people from the cult of Trump, the cult of QAnon, the cult of white supremacism. and that they're being advised by this very nefarious individual who's very well connected, it seems, within the U.S. government and how to do it. So that's a direct connection, right? Now, some people have misquoted me and said that I said they were being funded by the State Department. That's not the case, because there would be receipts for that. I mean, everyone the State Department gives money to, it's pretty upfront, right? This is much more shady and nefarious. But the fact that Steve Hassan is part of this BreadTube universe, the fact that he's calling for mass deprogrammings, the fact that AOC echoed his call and said that there needed to be deprogrammings of Trump supporters, the fact that Vosh tweeted out that that you can't have democracy and these people need to disappear, is what he said after January 6th. He tweeted out there needed to be basically a mass disappearance of Trump supporters in the United States. This all points to BreadTube being more than just some people fooling around on the internet. Again, right, there's no smoking gun, and that's not the point, right? The point is that with their ideology, with their distortion of Marxism, with their inciting people against genuine anti-imperialists, that they are serving imperialism, with their promotion of degrowth and the idea that the problem of climate change is a problem of fossil fuels. We need to get beyond fossil fuels. We need fusion energy. We need higher forms of technology, not lower forms of technology. And we need to get beyond production organized for profit, right? If we want to have a sustainable relationship with our natural resources, we need a rationally organized economy. We need to get rid of production for profit, the one thing that BreadTube insists you cannot do, right? That's what we need to do. The idea that the answer to climate change is degrowth, is making everybody poorer, that's not the solution, but it is the solution that the people that are already at the top of the world would like. I'm sure that's the solution that they're looking for. So that kind of shows you what BreadTube is all about. The book it's 4 chapters, right? Chapter 1, who and what is BreadTube, the nature of the counter gang. Chapter 2, understanding capitalism and socialism. Chapter 3, Nazi. I talk about what fascism actually is. I quote R. Paul Dutt, the great Marxist theorist from Britain, in his writings on fascism. I quote, Georgy Dimitrov, and I explain what fascism actually is, and how, ContraPoints and others have got this very silly middle-class definition of fascism that comes out of the new left of the 1960s. Chapter 4, I talk about, left pessimism. I talk about George Sorel, the syndicalist anarchist who was the inspiration for Benito Mussolini and fascism, and how left-wing pessimism and the birth strike, the idea that we need to reduce the population, the idea that economic growth is bad. I talk about Margaret Sanger and how she went from Marxism to Malthusianism during the 1920s. I talk about that. And then I have a conclusion. And then there's a couple appendices. I talk about the Center for Political Innovation. And I give my own, I have a note on the political development of the author. I talk about who I am, right? Where did I come from, right? I mean, people should know who I am and why I'm writing this. So yeah, it's a short book. It's 200 pages, but everyone who's actually read it seems to like it. So there you go. Lots of good reviews. Lots of people who haven't read it don't seem to like it, but who's read it seems to like it. And as I've said before, I'll say it again. There is not one honest criticism that I've heard yet, right? Not one. Okay, I have heard there have been a number of criticisms directed at the book that are just total distortions. I mean, people are claiming I don't support Chelsea Manning because in the section describing, H-bomber guy Harris Michael Brewis, I mentioned that he streamed with Chelsea Manning. What is that? That's not what that means. There's a claim that, multiple people have claimed there's not a single citation in this book. There is a very long bibliography. I cite the CIA World Fact Book. I cite, Drama Report. I cite the New York Times. I cite Marx. I cite Lenin. I cite, Dimitrov. I cite R. Palm Dutt. I cite Steve Hassan's own words from the Jordan.
Right here.
I mean, it's like, these people, they just lie. This is not an academic piece. This isn't a college thesis. If you were looking for there to be like parentheses after every paragraph, that's not the kind of piece it is. This is a popular essay. This is a popular essay explaining Marxism. And my hope, and it's worked out very, very well, is that, BreadTube folks will buy this and read it and learn something about actual Marxism. And maybe a few of them can join the efforts to actually get the working class to organize itself and fight for a government of action that'll fight for working families. And I will say it's worked out. This book is the #1 new release on Amazon in the category of anarchism, right? The #1 new release. You know, it was, for a while, it was number 5 overall on Amazon in terms of in anarchism. Now it's about number 10 overall. But of all the books on all of Amazon about anarchism, this is the number 1 new release you're looking at. So I must have done something. They took the bait, and it's like they're so arrogant. I mean, it didn't occur to them that, like, you know, if you just, I mean, like, I didn't even publish the book. I hadn't even published the book, and already there was somebody, you know, had a screenshot of the of me talking about the book, and was claiming all kinds of things about the book before it was even published. And then, like, the second it was published, you know, these bread tubers were talking about it. Bring it on, guys, please, because everybody the book sees that they're lying. And I don't understand this. Why, you know, if you're going to criticize something I say, criticize something I actually say, criticize one of my actual positions, right? I'm sure they disagree with me about the definition of socialism, about the definition of fascism, degrowth, etc. But they don't want to argue about that. They just want to take things out of context. They want to tell lies, and they want to, you know, they're trying really hard to convince people that I'm a white supremacist, right? And it's like, I mean, are these people not capable of arguing about anything real? It's really kind of disturbing. I'm describing who these people are. That's the purpose of chapter 1, which seems to be the only chapter any of these people ever care about. I mean, I wrote a whole book about what they believe and why it's wrong. All they care about is the opening section where I mention a few of their big names, and then they want to, like, take sentences. And it's like, again, this is like high school gossip, right? Like, there's real politics out there, for goodness sakes, right? You know, and who are these people? And who are these people is a fair question, because I've been doing Marxist activism for well over 10 years. Occupy Wall Street was 10 years ago, and I'd already been doing it for 3 or 4 years, you know, at that point. I've never met any of these people, right? No one has ever heard of any of these people. You know, there's no record of them being in any anarchist group, being in any socialist group. There's no, these people just out of nowhere appeared. You know, there's, you know, Thought Slime was a failed comedian who doing, you know, YouTube movie reviews, and then just suddenly out of the blue, oh, he's the top anarchist on the internet, right? Vosh, I mean, came out of nowhere. Again, his dad's a Hollywood producer who worked on The Matrix. You know, I mean, ContraPoints is, you know, got an academic record, but there's people who actually believe in these ideas, who've been going around, you know, trying to promote them and actually understand these ideas, but they don't suddenly blow up, right? And they don't get promoted in mainstream media. One thing that's interesting is that, you know, Destiny is technically not part of BreadTube. Destiny's Stephen Bunnell, but he's the kingmaker of BreadTube. I mean, they all trace back to him. I mean, Vosh started out on Destiny's streams, right? You know, there's a relationship with ContraPoints there, and I mean, you can go down the line. And Destiny is a quite nefarious person. I mean, let's not forget that Destiny had his little meltdown where he called for, you know, he voiced support for white nationalists shooting down Black Lives Matter activists, right? You know, I mean, so it's like, you know, it's like you want to play 6 degrees of separation. And who is Destiny, right? So Destiny, Stephen Bunnell, he's from Nebraska, and he was a carpet cleaner, but he was really good at playing StarCraft 2. Which is a video game for those who may not know.
I remember StarCraft.
Yeah. And I guess he figured out a way to monetize his playing of the video game, so he did not have to work as a carpet cleaner anymore. And that made him kind of a hero. He was the first full-time game streamer. He was kind of a celebrity, and he was a libertarian, basically. While he played video games, he would make political comments. But then, you know, right around the time Trump got elected, it was announced on a number of mainstream media outlets, it was like a news item, that Destiny, this notorious troll, is going to be, you know, debunking the alt-right and all of this. Very interesting. And all of a sudden, Destiny started debating people on the alt-right and arguing with them. And again, he's kind of a nefarious figure. And again, he's said some very strange things. Let me tell you, I didn't even know who BreadTube was. You know, I'm a news reporter. That's my job. I'm a news reporter. You know, I'm interested in Marxism and all of that. The only reason I know who BreadTube is because of the fact that randomly I was reached out to by Caleb Kane, Faraday Speaks, because they wanted me to debate Destiny about communism. And I had never heard of Caleb Kane, Faraday Speaks, and I had never heard of Destiny. So I looked up both of those people, and then I asked, you know, younger people that I know, who is it? And they're like, Destiny? You're going to debate Destiny? I mean, he's got hundreds of thousands of. I thought, okay, I did it, and I mean, I wiped the floor with Destiny. He didn't know what was coming. I mean, the debate we had, it was basically it functioned on. It was he came in with the assumption that socialism had never worked anywhere, and that anyone who claimed it did would just be outrageous. And I sat there and we went back and forth back and forth where I was just talking about Cuba's achievements, talking about the Soviet Union's achievements. And he just sat there, again, with this arrogance, assuming that there could be no possible argument in favor of socialist central planning. And he just fell apart. And at one point, I was citing Cuba's life expectancy, and he said, "Oh yeah, what does life expectancy prove?" And I said, "Oh, and
that doesn't matter."
Yeah, I mean, even a lot of his own fans were kind of like blown away. They didn't expect me to do that well. So then all of a sudden, I was starting to get all kinds of messages and all kinds of things from this whole universe that I heard about called BreadTube, which I'd never heard of. And again, I've been doing socialist activism and the socialist community for years. I'd never heard of any of these folks. There's this huge online community. So after a while, I ended up, I saw that this Vosh person was going around promoting the idea that tankies, i.e. people who defend the Soviet Union, like Albert Einstein, like the Black Panthers, are the same as Nazis. So I debated Vosh, and there you have that, right? And so I guess this is an important thing. And people ask me, why did you write a whole book, right? That's one criticism I've gotten. People say, why would you write a whole book, about internet drama? Well, I didn't write a book about internet drama. I wrote a book about socialism and communism. And the reason I wrote a book directed at the BreadTube view is because more people listen to BreadTube than any socialist or communist group in the United States. Name the communist group. More people are listening to Vosh and ContraPoints and Thought Slime than are listening to the RCP, than are listening to the Workers' World Party, than are listening to the Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist, the alphabet soup of parties. Nobody listen. None of them have as big of an audience as BreadTube does, right? And
right.
Audience, mainly younger folks. And so if they're putting out a message and a viewpoint in the name of socialism and Marxism that is pro-imperialist, it is our job to counter them. And I quote Vladimir Lenin, where he says, exposing these opportunists and social imperialists is our duty. It is our duty to expose and challenge.
Some people might confuse BreadTube with social democracy. People who advocate social democracy or social democrats with BreadTube. And let's really break this down and let's compare and contrast them, because BreadTube seems to be a more dangerous ideology, as you point out. So how is it so?
Okay, well, on the left, let's just start at the beginning here, right? Among people that are against capitalism, you generally have three categories: anarchism, communism, and social democracy, right? Communists, they seek to seize political power. They seek to take control of the state, to create a proletarian state that can organize the means of production rationally, have socialism, which eventually can lay the basis for a higher stage of communism, a stateless classist world. Anarchists, they seek to get beyond capitalism without state involvement. They reject politics, right? Anarchists, they want to form cooperatives. They want to have a great general strike. They favor direct action, the employer versus the employee. They reject the struggle to seize political power. They don't vote. They are into direct action. They reject politics, right? They are the ultra left, right? And then social democracy, they're the folks that say, well, rather than having a revolution or a seizure of political power, we can have capitalism just kind of gradually turn into socialism, right? The movement is everything, the goal is nothing. Edward Bernstein is probably the most prominent articulator of the social democratic viewpoint, that socialism is simply the sum of reforms, right? One day we'll have free healthcare, the next day we'll have better protections for labor unions, next we'll do this, and one day all of these little day-to-day progressive reforms will just kind of add up into socialism. That's social democracy, right? And that's the viewpoint of the Labour Party in Britain. That's the viewpoint of the French Socialist Party. That's the viewpoint of, the German Social Democratic Party. That's the viewpoint of a lot of the leaders of DSA. That's what they think, right? Is that gradually, Western capitalist countries, through one step at a time, through people voting and coming into the political process, we're going to gradually have socialism. And on top of that, they tend to believe that the Western capitalist countries, because they're the most quote unquote democratic, and because they have, the bigger labor unions and stuff, that they're further along to socialism than the third world countries. So when we meddle in third world countries and overthrow governments, that's good, because we're making them more like the West, which is the furthest along in the road to socialism. That's social democracy. Well, social democracy, that viewpoint, it's not a revolutionary viewpoint because it's pro-imperialist, and it's also, it's not, it's not Marxist. It's not, it doesn't seek, the seizure of political power. It sees capitalism just kind of naturally turning into socialism one step at a time. But they still believe in historical progress, and they still want the means of production to be controlled by the working class. They still want to eventually create a planned economy. They just want to do it. They see it happening very gradually. And they're pro-imperialist in the process, but they believe in technological progress. They believe the human race is moving forward and advancing. So it's a watered down pro-imperialist version of Marxism. What BreadTube believes is not anarchism, it's not communism, and it's not social democracy. BreadTube, they believe that there are too many people in the world, that, human beings have gone too far. It was better off when we all lived in caves as hunter-gatherers. Furthermore, they believe that you should not have a rationally planned economy. You should have individual worker co-ops that are formed on a voluntary basis. That's not social democracy. Historically, one big difference. Historically, social democrats tended to oppose kind of militancy. During the 1930s, the Communist Party pushed sit-down strikes. They wanted workers to occupy their factories. Well, the conservative AFL leaders that were in the Socialist Party said, oh, that's too radical. Don't do that. You're breaking the law when you occupy your factory. Well, the communists wanted more militant activism. Social Democrats were always the ones saying, cool down, don't get too radical. Let's all just vote for the Democrats and hope that one step at a time. That's social democracy. BreadTube, they don't say that. They don't say slow down and all of that. They say the opposite. They want to escalate the confrontation with the right wing to a point of violence at a time when the right wing is far better armed, right? Has far bigger base among the population. They basically say, oh no, we can't argue with Trump supporters. Oh no, we can't argue with people who believe in QAnon. The only answer to Trump supporters and QAnon people is violence in the streets. They want Antifa, they want street fighting and all of that. And if they are successful in fomenting the violence and chaos and civil war they seem to want, there will be one of two things that will happen. One, there will be a huge crackdown on all political activism in order to bring stability. Or two, the right wing and fascism will just win, right? And neither of those things are desirable, right? Escalating tensions in the streets with these folks right now is not a good thing to be doing right now. At this point, there are many Americans who have been taken in by right-wing demagogy. And what needs to be done is they need to see that the reason that their jobs have been eliminated, the reason that their kids are stuck in low wages and student debt, the reason that things are bad is because of capitalism, and that we have a common destiny with people around the world that are struggling against imperialism. But BreadTube, first of all, they don't want living standards to rise, and second of all, they seem to want to escalate to some kind of confrontation with middle Americans and with average folks who are drawn into the right wing. And that's very, very dangerous. So it's the opposite of social democracy. Social democracy is always pouring cold water on it, toning things down. These folks want to escalate it really fast at a time when that would be not strategic. There's an ideological problem in America right now. People don't understand Marxism. Right? Trump tells everybody that Joe Biden's a communist. Oh, you're mad about how things are? Well, it's because we live under communism.
My God.
And, BreadTube says communism's a pencil factory or something. I mean, there's an ideological problem. And that's why I formed the Center for Political Innovation, to try and address this ideological problem. People need to be educated about Marxism. One of the things that nobody will ever do on the internet is admit that they were wrong. Well, I will admit that I was wrong. For years, I was an activist in a particular communist group, and our answer was build the movement, build the movement, build the movement, right? If only the protests can get bigger, we can just go build the movement, that'll be the answer. I was wrong. You can't build the movement if, you have to get to average Americans, right? And right now, the movement is so controlled by the Democratic Party that building the movement is not desirable. We need to get out of the movement and get to the masses, right? And that's what we need to do. And this build the movement strategy is not going to work. And again, average Americans have no idea what Marxists believe, no idea what socialists believe. And our job at this point is to get to the masses.
So touching on your book still, the you mentioned ContraPoint's video about fascism in your book. I've seen that video a few times, and I do have my own problems with it. even though I do like some of her content, she seems to be redefining fascism without a lot of like reading fascist writers or thinkers. So could you tell us about how her video fails to define fascism, and how this theme of redefining these these ideologies, wow, my question trailed off. Could you tell us how this is a problem, and not just with like BreadTube, but with even like socialists and even liberals don't even seem to understand their own ideology, because we just keep redefining things and like making shit up, I guess.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to say ContraPoints, of all of the BreadTubers, I would say she's really the best. She's the highest caliber. And a lot of her content is very good. Her video on incels is tremendous. Her video on Jordan Peterson is tremendous. And that's why a lot of the BreadTubers hate her. You know, because she's accused, and she's admitted in her videos, that she's widely accused of, quote, sympathizing with bigots, because she tries to understand why people believe these things before she argues against them. And you're not allowed to do that in the BreadTube universe. No. Everyone who you can declare to be racist, sexist, or transphobic needs to be just immediately beaten up and canceled. You know, that's how BreadTubers see things. But ContraPoints, I guess she takes her job as a deprogrammer seriously and is trying to find out why people believe things, and so she can counter them, which is like, wow, you know, I mean, it seems like common sense to me, but in the BreadTube universe, it's an unforgivable crime. And she's been canceled many times. And, you know,
I mean, so many times.
Yeah, and she herself is trans, but the trans community has canceled her simply because she questions aspects of what it means to be trans, you know. And she's, you know, given her opinion on debates within the trans community in ways that other trans folks don't approve of. But her video, the video that made her go viral, the video that made her famous, is this video called How to Spot a Fascist. And that video is beneath her. That video is trash, okay? It's just utter trash. And I'm sorry, she can do way better than that. And she has done way better than that since then. And that video, it starts out by talking about what fascists are, and it defines white nationalists, right? Which are, you know, the followers of Richard Spencer. You know, she gives 3 beliefs that they believe in. I guess they believe that, you know, there is a genocide being conducted against white people, that there's a secret Jewish conspiracy backing that genocide, and that the answer is the creation of some kind of white ethno-state, right? Whites only territory within the United States. Well, that's pretty accurate. That's what white, you know, Richard Spencer, white supremacists, that's what they believe. And I've debated against those people. In Russia, someone with that view confronted me, and I destroyed that viewpoint. You know, and I debated against Eric Stryker, and I debated against Michael Enoch, and I debated against, in person, mind you. I had an in-person debate with Augustus Sol Invictus. I have demolished that viewpoint, but that is what white nationalists believe. So then from there, after she defines what white nationalists believe, she then from there, you know, argues that all over the internet, there are all kinds of people that are white nationalists that are pretending to be Trump supporters, pretending to be conservatives, pretending to be other things. And they're actually white nationalists. And the way you can tell is by these secret hand signals that they're giving and these secret emojis that they're using. And of course they'll disavow and say they disagree with white nationalists. As she says in the video, I am not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say. And it's a little bit delusional. I mean, this is on the level of some John Birch Society stuff. There are white nationalists out there. I would argue there's many other white nationalists are fascists, but there are many other fascists out there. There, you know, I mean, you know, there are many, you know, there are many people on the right who are advocates of anarcho-capitalist libertarianism, but have a fascistic streak. You know, there's people that are into the traditionalism and Julius Evola. You know, the white nationalist current is not the only current of far right or fascistic politics in the United States, mind you. On top of that, this country has like tens of millions of people who voted for Trump, right? And not all of them are secret white nationalists, but according to ContraPoints, they are, because certain phrases like Western civilization, criticizing, you know, repeating anti-immigrant bigotry kind of talking points, all of that makes you part of this secret cabal of white nationalists. And that's delusion, right? I mean, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of people that are conservative. There's a lot of people on the left who are anti-imperialist. I mean, there's many, many different viewpoints out there. And to argue that all these people who use the wrong hand sign or use the wrong hand gesture or whatever, are all part of a vast, secret white nationalist plot in order to carry out the politics of Richard Spencer. It is the most naive and stupid viewpoint I've ever heard. I mean, this is not rational, right? This is like, this might make a good movie or something, but it's not reality. I'm sorry. And also it doesn't understand what fascism is. And, Arpalm Dutt and Georgy Dimitrov and the communist movement has long explained what fascism actually is. Fascism is when there's an economic crisis in capitalist society and a section of the ruling class seizes control of the government in the hopes of stabilizing society. That's Bonapartism. But fascism is a particular form of Bonapartism in which they do it by mobilizing mass destruction, violence, and terror to stabilize the economy. Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Pinochet, Franco in Spain. It is a mass mobilization of violence and terror by one section of the ruling class carried out to stabilize capitalism. That's what it is. And the ideology is irrelevant. Sometimes, Mussolini, he called himself a futurist, right? He was a futurist, but he carried out mass violence and terror to stabilize Italian society. The Nazis, they were all about knights and castles and Germany and Wagner, but they mobilized mass violence and terror to stabilize capitalism, right? Franco, his followers, they thought they were syndicalists, right? They were national syndicalists in Spain, and they drew from the anarcho-syndicalist teachings as well as mystical Spanish and Roman Catholic. But at the end of the day, they mobilized mass violence and terror to stabilize capitalist society. That's what fascism is. And, the hand signals, the dog whistles, the words are irrelevant, right? It doesn't matter what fascists say, it's what they do that makes them fascists, right? That's what makes them fascists, right? And that's what they don't get, because fascism is a problem rooted in capitalism. And capitalism breaks down, it moves toward fascism. That is the natural outgrowth of capitalist economic crisis, is fascism. The only way to stop fascism is to have socialism, right? But ContraPoints and her video is a continuation of a long-standing trend of trying to get away from this scientific understanding of fascism and make fascism into something different. And that long-standing trend is directly traceable to the CIA, their Congress for Cultural Freedom program, and you can talk about Theodore Adorno and his book, The Authoritarian Personality, which he worked on with, people associated with the Tavistock Institute, which is a British intelligence psychological research facility located in Britain. Theodore Adorno was promoted by the CIA in Der Monat, which was the CIA-funded socialist magazine in Germany. And it's this whole book that they wrote about how fascism is, it's a certain personality type. It's psychological. And if you're the kind of person who believes in truth and would go and fight and die for a cause and thinks that there's clear right and wrong in the world, you have an authoritarian personality. And that's the cause of fascism. Well, that's ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, that's ridiculous. But if you read The Authoritarian Personality, one could just as easily be describing communists as describing fascists. And it's basically, if you're not a postmodernist, if you believe in right and wrong, if you believe in truth, if you have principles, if you want to live a life, doing the right thing and sacrificing for a cause, you're a potential fascist and you're a dangerous person. That's what Adorno argues in his book. That has nothing to do with the Marxist scientific understanding of fascism. But it has a lot to do with people that would want to protect the liberal society from those who might want to challenge it from either the left or the right.
Exactly. Yes, that's I remember when that video came out and it was really, really popular and Trump got elected and everybody was like, oh no, we live under fascism suddenly. And I just remember being really, that didn't sit right with me, because they're just assigning the symptoms of capitalism a new name, and they're blaming it on Trump, and they're kind of absolving like Democrats for some of their racist nonsense and some of their contributions to the quote unquote fascism they prescribe to Trumpism or whatever. It's they're cut from the same cloth, and it's so I think it's really reductive. I think it's kind of dangerous to just not to separate the Democratic Party from any of these things.
That's the thing about ContraPoint's video, right? So
yeah.
if an average American worker is a secret Nazi because they say, I love my country, what about Joe Biden getting up in front of people and saying, poor kids are just as smart as white kids?
Yeah.
I mean, nobody thinks he's Joe Biden, right? Or what about Hillary Clinton talking about super predators, right? And it's again, and the left condemns them for saying these things, but that's never smoking gun proof that they're part of this vast secret white nationalist cabal that's going to seize the government, right? I mean, this silly conspiracy theory that is the basis for BreadTube politics, right? It's not understanding what causes the tendency to move toward fascism in a capitalist crisis. And, unfortunately, BreadTube aren't the only people promoting this kind of nonsense. There's a movie, the Spike Lee movie. I like Spike Lee's movies, right? His movie Malcolm X is very good, I thought. He's made other movies, but, Do the Right Thing is a great movie. But, his movie Black Klansman, it's a great movie. It's very entertaining, but it kind of leads to this conclusion that the problem isn't capitalism. It's that there's all these Nazis and Ku Klux Klan people that have secretly infiltrated the government. So what we have to do is we have to get good people in the government to rout out this conspiracy, and that'll make everything okay. And you know what that sounds an awful lot like, and I hate to say this, and I'm sure people are going to just get so angry when I say this, it sounds a lot like, anti-Semitism. What do anti-Semites say? Well, capitalism's fine, imperialism's fine, Western civilization is fine. There's just this evil cabal of people that are plotting, to do something. And we just, purge Western civilization of this evil cabal, everything will be fine. When you start talking that way, you're not a Marxist. That's not scientific thinking. That's not economic understanding. That's just silly stuff. And BreadTube, what they believe is this weird, mirror image of anti-Semitism, a secret plot of anti-Semitic white nationalists have maneuvered into the government. So we need to mobilize everyone into a fit of cancel culture, pro-Biden sentiments, purge the vast white nationalist conspiracy, and then everything will be fine. Well, no, everything's not going to be fine because the problems are rooted in the capitalist system, right? That's what Dimitrov understood. That's what Marx understood in his book, 18th Brumaire. That's what was understood by R. Palm Dutt in his book, Fascism and Social Revolution. And that's what Marxism offers. Marxism explains all of this. And that's why we need Marxism. Look, what BreadTube says, their critique of capitalism comes down to, that some people have more money than others, and that's unfair. Or some people own factories, other people work in factories, that's unfair. Marx was not the first person to say stuff like that. People have been saying that for hundreds of years before Marx ever showed up, okay? Marxism doesn't say that capitalism's immoral or unfair. Marxism says that capitalism is unsustainable, and it understands the way capitalism works. It understands, production for use, for production for profit rather than social use. It understands the general law of capitalist accumulation. It understands the problem of overproduction and the tendency for the falling rate of profits. Marx did not go around saying, "Oh, you're the factory owner, you're the worker. That's unfair." That's not Marxism, okay? That's moralism, and it's correct, but it's not Marxism. Marxism is scientific. It brings with it a scientific understanding of how capitalism works. And these people don't have that at all, and are working actively to obscure it.
Yeah, no, you kind of touched on my next question, because a common theme on our show is how being a communist is synonymous as being a patriot. So, but we often see BreadTube people and other synthetic leftists and ultra leftists attack anyone that dares label themselves as patriotic, as a national chauvinist, or whatever a label they like to put on it. Why is this the case? And talk about the history of socialist patriotism in America.
Okay, well, first of all, we want to just distinguish between patriotism and nationalism, right? Nationalism is loyalty to one's nation, and it is, putting the needs of that nation above others, right? If you're a British nationalist, you put the needs of the British nation above all others, right? If you're a French nationalist, you put the needs of your French nation above all others. And that's different, right? And the United States is not a nation state, mind you, right? We don't have the attributes of a nation. We don't have a common culture, a common language, a common heritage. We're not a nation. The United States is not a nation. So you can't even really be an American nationalist. There are some people that might disagree with me, but being an American nationalist is, first of all, it's an oxymoron. But second of all, if it weren't, I would be opposed to it. Being a patriot is different than being a nationalist. Being a patriot means you want what's best for the country you live in, right? Being a patriot, like a patriot, it's kind of like, when you have a family, right? You just want what's best for your family. But that means that you want your family to get along with other families, right? That means that you want your family to live in a neighborhood that's prosperous, in a country that's prosperous, in a world that's prosperous, right? You know, you're not a chauvinist. You're not going around saying that your family is better than other people's families and putting down other families. You're just saying that I want what's best for my family. And being a patriot simply means you want what is best for the country in which you live. Okay, that's all it means. It means you want what is best for a country, the country in which you live. And if you are a communist, you are the truest patriot, because the only way things can get better for the country in which we live, the United States, is for us to end imperialism and for the imperialist capitalist system to be dismantled. The only way things can get better for the United States is if we have friendship with countries around the world. The only way things in the United States can get better is if we have a system where production is organized to meet the needs of the people, not the profits of a few. So we communists are the true patriots of America. In the Little Red Book, there's a chapter called Patriotism and Internationalism. And Mao Zedong points out that there is no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism. The only way to truly be a patriot, according to Marxism, is to be an internationalist. The only way to want what's good for your country is to want your country to be at peace and cooperating with other countries in the world. And the only way to truly be an internationalist is to want your country, as well as other countries, to live in peace and prosperity. There's no contradiction between patriotism and internationalism. And that's what we need to be clear about. And in the United States, communists have historically been patriotic. They have rejected national chauvinism, and I hate national chauvinism. Great example. You know, my whole life I've heard, this is the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest country in the world. Well, that's not a good statement, right? You're putting down other countries. You're arrogantly assuming that yours is the best. It's rather boastful. And on top of that, no one can ever tell me why, right? No one, like, did you do the math? Like, we have more money than other. No one can ever tell me why we're the greatest country, you know, but we are because we are. And if you don't think that, well, what are you? You must be brainwashed, because everybody knows this is the greatest country in the world. Well, you know, that's not something we need to get rid of. But, you know, communists historically in the United States, they have been the ones that fought for civil rights. They've been the ones that fought to abolish slavery. They fought for the rights of women to vote. They fought for the labor unions, and they did it in the name of building a better country. Look, I mean, during the 1930s, the Communist Party USA, they had Abraham Lincoln's face at everything. They, you know, when they fought in Spain, they called their brigade the Abraham Lincoln Brigade that fought in Spain. That was the American communists. Thousands of them went to Spain to fight against fascism. It was the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. You know, they used to talk about how, you know, if Marx, if Washington and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln were alive today, they would be members of the Communist Party. And that was the big part of the Popular Front approach of the communists during the 1930s, was making clear that they were the inheritors of the progressive side of American history. And ultimately, this is what communists should do in any country. Okay, you know, if you're a communist in Brazil and you want to lead Brazil, you don't go around saying fuck Brazil, right? If you're a communist in Peru and you want to lead Peru, you don't go around saying fuck Peru, right? That's, you know, if we want the American working class to put us in charge of society and give us the ability to make a socialist economy, we need to get them to understand that our goal is to make their lives better, that our goal is to improve their conditions. This should just be politics 101. But when communism becomes this teenage edgelord thing, right? When it's more about telling your mom and dad to go screw themselves, and, you know, then it's something different. But at the end of the day, right, communism as a serious political movement in any country in the world is about making a better life for people by dismantling capitalism and imperialism and having a rationally planned economy to serve public good and not profits, right? And it is the ultimate expression of patriotism in any country in the world. And, you know, I mean, read the letter that Abraham Lincoln wrote, or I'm sorry, read the letter that Lenin wrote to the American workers.
Right.
1919, Lenin wrote a letter to the American workers. And what did he say to them? Did he say, oh, you're a bunch of rotten Euro settlers? No. He said that the American people have a revolutionary heritage, right? And he talked about the Civil War and the struggle to abolish slavery and how heroic that was. And he talked about how, you know, the defeat of the British Empire in 1776 and how good that was. You know, Marx had you know, and Marx and Lenin, they appealed to the progressive side. We communists have to fit ourselves into American history. We can't, Americans are never going to adopt an ideology from another country, right? And if we want to be taken seriously in this country, we need to fit ourselves into this country and show that we are what's good about America. We represent the good part of American history, and that socialism, when it comes to the United States, it won't be the importation of Mao Zedong thought or Kim Il-sung-ism or Fidel Castroism. It will be the John Browns and the Harriet Tubmans and the Malcolm X's and the Dr. Martin Luther Kings. It'll be that side of American history, the legacy of progressive struggle, taking hold and becoming the government.
Exactly. And I couldn't agree more, because in order to unite the masses, we must win back what it means to be a patriot. And that means we must challenge the ideological worldview of American exceptionalism on the right and on the synthetic left. And being a patriot isn't just slapping a bumper sticker on your car or cloaking yourself in the flag while blindly supporting what our imperialist leaders are doing abroad. So-called socialists that burn the flag and claim that those that love their country are fascists, while spewing hatred for average Americans, are the opposite of what socialists are. And to be a patriot is to be a dissident. That means holding our government accountable to the supposed aspirations and values it claims to uphold. It also means wanting to unite the working class masses to overthrow our bourgeoisie dictatorship and create a worker state to ensure that our fellow proletarians in and outside our borders are protected and cared for. Because the only way to accomplish this ultimate goal is to root our patriotism in our rich American proletarian history and culture. Patriotism and communism are interlinked because both are tools of unity and liberation of the masses from a historical and collective enemy, the bourgeoisie.
I agree.
And that was my thought on that. And I know that you are also doing a big conference on this Saturday, correct?
Yes, we're going to be having a web conference for the Center for Political Innovation on the topic of socialist patriotism. And I'll be there. I'm not going to be one of the speakers, but we're going to have a veteran to talk about veterans issues. We're going to have a speaker on Abraham Lincoln and his relationship with Karl Marx. We're going to have a speaker on Thomas Paine and his legacy. And it's going to be a pretty good web conference. So I hope folks tune in. It'll be on my YouTube channel. It'll be on the Center for Political Innovation Facebook page, streaming. Should be good.
Well, Caleb, I think this is a great place to wrap up. Like you just said, I think people should tune into that web conference. I'll be tuning in. And before we wrap, let people know where they can find your work.
Oh, well, sure. Well, my book is available. It's, wherever books are sold. And on top of that, folks can, check out my website, calebmaupin.com. One thing I do want to say is, socialist movement, get your shit together.
Yeah.
I'm the first guy. Seriously, more people are listening to BreadTube talk about, socialism than any other source in the United States right now. Far more people are listening to them than any other source. So there, if Lenin was alive today, he would be writing a book about BreadTube. If Marx was alive today, he would be writing a book about BreadTube.
Mm-hmm.
We have a group of opportunists out there speaking in our name all over the internet, and people haven't written books about them, right? So if anything, there should be hundreds of books about BreadTube, right? In the 1930s, if something like BreadTube existed, the Communist Party would have hundreds of pamphlets out, they had many pamphlets on Norman Thomas, many pamphlets on anarchy, it needs to be answered. So, this is our responsibility as a movement, and we can't let these forces, dominate, right? And it's, we can knock them down and criticize them all we want, but at the same time, if we don't step up and do our part, and not just in terms of writing pamphlets and books or making videos, but actually in terms of building real organizations that can meet the needs of the people, if we can't step up and do that, we're kind of shirking our responsibility. So there you go. That's my argument. I hope I don't come across as too grumpy there, but
we love grumpy Caleb. Being grumpy.
Grumpy Caleb is our favorite.
Grumpy Uncle Caleb is always invited to the Red Lettuce to sound off about whatever he wants.
All right, very good.
Thank you so much, Caleb.